So without further ado, I will introduce our first speakers, Narjes Zivdar and Maryam Bidmeshgipour, who are presenting their paper, Community-Led Humanitarian Actions in Crisis, Rethinking the Aid Governance Modalities. Narjes Zivdar is a development practitioner and postgraduate scholar at University College London's Bartlett Development Planning Unit, where she is researching participatory monitoring and evaluation of development programs with funding from the British Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. Since 2015, Narjes has worked alongside community-based organisations and environmental justice networks and served as a research, monitoring and evaluation consultant for the international development agencies, including UN Food and Agriculture Programme, UN Habitat, the Danish Refugee Council, Relief International, and UNESCO's World Heritage Initiatives. Dr. Maryam Bidmeshgipour is a grants and partnership manager for Relief International based in Iran. She holds a PhD and MBA from University Technology, Malaysia, and has previously worked at the Refugee Council in roles including monitoring and evaluation specialist, government liaison officer, and livelihood officer. Narjes and Maryam, over to you.
Good day, everyone. For the purpose of today's presentation, my colleague and I would like to talk about the community-led humanitarian action during crisis and see if the modalities and aid governance need to be changed. We are going through the humanitarian response to COVID-19 outbreak in Iran to elaborate more on the aid delivery and the actors who have been engaged and participated in the response since past year. So the content of this study includes as a background the impact of COVID-19. Then we go through the humanitarian condition in multidimensional crisis. We will look at the need for a change in terms of the aid delivery during crisis. As a case study, we look at the Iran's COVID-19 response in the past year, who have been the humanitarian actors and what actions around this aid delivery has taken place, what are the humanitarian aid modalities, and what is the power of relation of aid. As a conclusion, we would like to move toward the community-based humanitarian leadership, looking at the good governance of aid and the roles of community and how their participation can bring a change. So for the purpose of this study, we are looking at the COVID-19 as a multi-dimensional crisis. Let's look at the impacts of COVID-19. As we are all aware, COVID-19 is far more than a health crisis. It is a pandemic that is impacting every area of human lives. It is not only the health situation of the people who is getting affected, but it has affected the economical situation of the countries. And as a result, too many people have continued to face job losses and rising poverty. The systematic crisis has so many layers and dimensions in which one condition or layer may worsen the other. This coronavirus pandemic particularly has shattered the global economy with drastic impacts on the marginalized group. Now that we are faced with the multidimensional crisis, let's have a look at the humanitarian impacts. The aid modalities and how the international humanitarian aid is becoming managed and governed become more critical. The resources are becoming more and more limited, and the modalities to employ them become more critical. There also lies uncertainty that policymakers should integrate into their programming. And also there is a need to revisit the previous mechanism, highlighting the role of communities who are the most affected by crisis in one hand, and on the other hand, to look at the potential role they can have in community planning and response. Considering the potential role of communities in response planning, we think there is a need for a change in providing aid. We need to provide assistance on a scale and in a form that enables the affected communities to meet their immediate needs and to improve their self-reliance in the long run. There has been changes in aid practices and in the recipient countries in terms of the economic shock, prices, currency inflation, and political barriers, and these changes need to be matched. There is a need for the improvement of governance system engaging the communities. In order to have better idea of what types of aid and support have been provided in response to COVID-19, we are looking at Iran as a case study. Different organizations from UN agencies and INGOs including UNICEF, UNHCR, WHO, NRC, WFP, Relief International, and UNDP have been engaged in providing response since last year. The aid delivery and support ranges from provision of COVID-19 test kits, provision of personal protective equipment, hygiene items and essential medicine, cash assistance for vulnerable people, establishing isolation centers and COVID recovery units, rehabilitation or establishing facilities in a school and providing needed hand washing stations, to advocating for new policies and social norms or intervention that positively influence policy behaviors.
Following that, we will analyze the humanitarian aid modalities and the governance system of aid in Iran. The table demonstrates different types of assistance provided by the key international humanitarian actors in Iran. It also shows the key role that they can play in terms of community awareness and engagement, as well as government advocacy to ensure a long-term response to crisis, which is relatively limited and overlooked in the current context of Iran. In a similar way, when we look at the stakeholder analysis of such system, or what we call it power relations of aid, it can be understood that the local communities, civil society organizations, and non-governmental organizations, as well as the social mobilizers in the field, have a relatively high interest when it comes to aid system. However, their influence compared to the line ministries and government offices, international donors, and aid agencies is relatively limited. This will lead us to ask, who are the true humanitarian leaders? During COVID-19 crisis, community participation matters because residents can best identify the needs of and the solutions for their respective communities. They know what knowledge and rumors are circulating. They can provide insight into stigma and structural barriers. They are well placed to work with others from their communities to devise collective responses. They have a high interest in humanitarian aid, and therefore their influence could be significant. There are 5 main components for good governance of the aid system suggested by the European Commission, which can shed some light on our question. Effectiveness, which means the governance of the aid system should improve the effectiveness of the aid system as a whole. Efficiency, which means the governance arrangements should be efficient and effective, avoiding unnecessary costs for donors and recipients at the same time. Legitimacy, in terms of the governance system, should represent all affected stakeholders, setting rules that apply equally to everyone, treating every stakeholder with respect. Accountability, which means good governance, must be transparent and accountable to stakeholders. And the last but not the least, the adaptability, which means the governance of aid must not only address world as it finds it today, but ensure that it is fit for purpose in case of future crisis. Given the crucial role of local communities during a crisis like COVID-19 pandemic, it is concluded that community-led humanitarian actions will lead us to a good governance arrangements during a crisis, which means an efficient, effective, accountable, legitimate, and adaptive system of humanitarian aid. And as a final word, the resilience has becoming the criterion of everything, and this implies the different ways of organizing aid systems, but also the society. The systems which are decentralized have a much higher degree of immunity to risks, disruptions, and the challenges which we are facing now. As opposed to a control system, they can regenerate themselves from anywhere, and they have a high ability to improvise solutions to a problem like COVID-19 crisis. Thank you very much for your attention.